Hello, everyone. It is so nice to be today here with you. Ivana, thank you for such a splendid introduction. I am extremely excited to be a part of this extraordinary series of talks. Marina, I enjoyed your presentation very much, and I thought I'd hear Konstantin from the boat because he announced that big presentation coming from the sea. But hopefully he'll join later. When I received a phone call from Ivana asking me to participate in this project, I immediately knew what I wanted to talk to you about, and that was artistic expression, or let's say expressive visual language in times of constraints. The story is loosely inspired by our current coronavirus situation. However, I developed a storyline that will take you on a journey through various chapters of creative outcomes in trying times, among which one of those is going to be coronavirus art. Okay, moving, yes. Well, first I'd like to introduce myself from the point of where I come from. It is a very long story, so here is the shortest version. I was born in Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia and Herzegovina state, when it was a part of the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. I lived most of my life in Serbia. I have close family ties with Bulgaria. I married a Slovenian, and I currently live in the US, in the state of Kansas. And let's try to do the shortest version of my career path. As you can see, I started off with the thought of maybe becoming a simultaneous interpreter one day. I can for sure tell you that I ran away from the idea of being a teacher. That option was off the table, but fate intervened, and I shifted towards graphic design in my college years. Towards my final year, I felt I needed more practical experience, and for some reason, I couldn't understand the pressure to graduate in that prevailing linear way, even though there are good reasons for it. But right about that time, a huge opportunity to join Exit Festival team came my way, and Exit Festival at the time was at its peak, and I felt that I couldn't pass on that opportunity, so a degree had to wait. In short, I went to work for the festival in my final year of college. I worked as a junior designer and a photographer. I stayed with them for 4.5 years while at the same time passing the exams I left behind. And when I finally finished my graduate thesis, I got offered a teaching position at the university. Some of you will notice the irony of this. So I accepted this teaching position because it screamed something new, but most of all, it screamed a huge challenge. And by accepting this challenge, some amazing things came out. I got to do research, teach and engage with students, go to international conferences, meet other scholars, publish papers, and acquire a PhD. And at one of these conferences, I met the director of the school I am currently teaching in. So if you look closely at this visual representation of my career path, you will observe that there are sequences of comfort times and discomfort times. And it is a trend that I seem to be following. It gets scary and paralyzing at times, but I learned that it is the only way I can assure personal development. And here I rephrased Stefan Sagmeister's statement. Well, I personalized it. Engaging with discomfort supports personal development. And my train of thought is, if I progress on a personal level, my creative work will progress as well. For today's talk, I decided to share with you 2 projects because my professional interests blend creative industry-driven projects and academic research. And I've chosen one project from each of the categories. And also both of these projects fall under the umbrella of creative outcomes in times of constraints that have befallen on a society. The first project that I want to share is Exit Festival. But let us first define constraints that are perceived as an obstacle for a society to freely develop. The constraint can be of economical, political, or medical nature, preventing the society to either live freely, express themselves freely, have access to basic living supplies, or access to resources for communication. And we all know that graphic design is a profession that thrives on constraints which are provided by a client. However, there have been times in our history when particular constraints have been imposed on a society and consequently artists over a longer period of time. And those were the times when artists had to reinvent themselves. And what we can conclude from history is that constraints yield creation. Unique creative outcomes emerge from times of crisis. And the Balkan region is a witness to one of such creative outcomes, the Exit Festival. Exit, well, most of you know about the festival, but let's say some words for the ones that do not know. Exit Festival is a result of the initiative of students and activists who decided to hold a 100-day protest against the oppressive regime in 2000. Their goal was to get more young people interested in politics, and they used music as a universal language to connect and bring people together. I joined Exit Festival at the time when it gained a strong voice as an advocate for democracy, but also when it became a host to world's renowned bands. And you have to understand the context of these events. So Serbia was very much close to the world at the time. To travel anywhere, you needed a visa, and to get a visa was humanly impossible. So Exit Festival hosting legends like Billy Idol, Iggy Pop, Sex Pistols, Manu Chao, Moloko, Prodigy, The Streets, that was extremely significant for the culture, but also for the sanity of the nation. And I happened to be involved in the official Exit photo team, first as a photographer and then as a photo team lead. Again, to paint the picture of the resources that we had. So internet database was nowhere near the scope it is today. We had very little references for concert photography, except very basic, standard tutorial-like guidelines. Digital photography was in its infancy. The equipment was insanely expensive. As a photo team, we were very much inspired by Magnum photographers like Bresson, Bury, Nachwey. For us, the thrill was immediacy of the situation. Well, let's say that concerts and live event photography happened right there and right then and there, as they say. So it was natural for us to seek that inspiration in documentary photography and photojournalism. And the thrill was the immediacy of the situation, unplanned scenes, chase for the moment, and play with stage lights, documenting the vibrant atmosphere and telling a story. It was never about the perfect shot in technical terms. I personally never placed primary focus on the sharpness of the photo or how big my lens is. There are some technical aspects that need to be considered, of course, but if I had a blurry photo that still captured the moment, atmosphere, and communicated something to the viewer, it was a good photo. It was always about the people, details, connections, music, and that raw energy where you see people taking the exit out of everyday mundane situations and losing themselves in the liberating sounds of artists on stage. They say that you have to suffer for your art, and I followed their advice. I managed to overwork myself one time, so they took me to the first aid tent for some refreshments. Silver lining, I got to take photos in the tent without being intrusive. The medical staff managed to get me patched up just in time to go and get shots of Chemical Brothers. So the moral of the story of the Exit Festival project is, in times of resistance, you definitely build up resilience. My next project comes from my academic research category. As we are currently facing a time with severe obstacles, I was curious to observe what directions visual and creative expression is taking due to the COVID lockdown. And I also wanted to see how this current expression differs from the previous chapters in history of graphic design when crises was setting the limitations. If we look in the past, we can find several periods of time where particular constraints challenged graphic artists to reinvent themselves. And because I'm pressed on time here, I'm going to single out only two of those periods, Cuban poster art and the Polish school of posters. So let us begin with the Cuban poster art. Cuban poster art has been globally appreciated for decades. Of course, there is this seductive veil over Cuba as a country due to its history and especially because of the revolution. However, the Cuban Revolution wasn't the lead protagonist in influencing the visual language. Cuba is a very small but very literate society, and posters as means of communication were very functional because of that. Another reason posters thrived as an art form is the lack of commercial material on the streets. Fidel Castro said, our enemy is imperialism, not abstract art. So the government was very revolutionary and they were relatively open to experimentation. The booming industry of the film industry was actually the ignition for the start of Cuban poster art. It is important to know that Cuban posters were produced by several big government or government-related organizations. So that was a big obstacle. Posters were not produced by individuals. Another limitation was of a technical nature. Silkscreen was the only available print option, and the print shops couldn't produce photographic stencils. So all the posters, even the ones where you have half toning, are done and cut by hand. Essentially, artists were free to experiment with visual language, but in the context of promoting film industry and public information. Technical limitations influenced that simplification of imagery, use of bold shapes and line work, and Cuba's geographical position is responsible for rich and vibrant tropical colors. In conclusion, all these circumstances and limitations produced very unique visual style. What we today call the Polish school of posters emerged as an artistic expression in late 50s of the 20th century. Eastern Europe at the time was controlled by politics, and it was a time of social realism that imposed dogmatic and rigorous voice, so that was perceived as a big obstacle or constraint for art practice. In such obstacle-induced times, artists felt that they were not able to express themselves through, let's say, high art, which at the time was painting. So instead, they turned to poster design. They didn't use traditional graphic elements and rigid compositions. Their style was painterly. So after the war, there was a shortage of supplies and artists had to use paintbrushes. And that is why painterly technique was crucial in their work. Also, they had this very unique imagination. They focused on visual metaphors and generally on rhetorical figures, and their work didn't reference directly the subject matter. As a result, posters were euphoric, rich with symbolism and allegory. There were traces of surrealism and melodrama as well. So these circumstances made Polish poster fundamentally different from design practices in other countries. The expressive, rhetorically charged, painterly style was Poland's unique contribution to graphic design and visual culture on a global scale. And we come to coronavirus art. Well, let's let's look for a brief second to the past references. So what is very much evident from these historical references and other references is that there were immense variations in the visual language in terms of style and expressiveness. And the tools these artists used were very tactile. So we had silkscreen, paintbrush, lithography. Coronavirus art, on the other hand, is rooted in computer generation. It is very technologically driven. And I'm going to dive straight into projects because our current situation doesn't really need any particular introduction. So the first project is called Live. It is a series of live talks on Instagram with focus on creative industry. The aim of this project is, well, it was, because it finished, it was to fight a quarantine, boredom, and instill hope. And the last talk was on May 15th. This project became a creative and very interesting act very quickly because it was done on the go. Talks were not staged, so this was not planned at all. Every designer or a studio or a typographer gave a talk that was not rehearsed. You would just jump into their private space. You would watch these presentations from the first-person view, which gave a sense of very intimate connection with these people. And each had their own style of presenting and setting the mood or drinking wine. So the project became very personal to all who engaged in it, almost it became very friendly. It was every day at the same time. For me, it became like a small addiction towards the end of the project. I would get a happy face when I woke up and saw notifications. Live Talk from has started a video. And I remember listening to Milkshake Studio presentation from China and, on the 15th of May. And they mentioned how that day was the last day of the talks. And I just screamed, no. But yeah, it was good while it lasted. Another project is Public Protest Poster, which has been around for some time. This is a demo platform that gives voices to people. And you can use this platform to design your own poster and anonymously share it with the community. Posters get projected from certain points in Barcelona and other cities. And during the lockdown, people have used this platform to voice out their thoughts on the situation. Posters are then projected on buildings. And in this instance, poster art takes on a whole new meaning because you usually consider a poster to be a printed object placed on, for example, streets or some indoor hall. The New Yorker magazine has published the postcards which illustrators from around the world made. They drew scenes from cities and their hand-captured moments of some surreal scenes. And I found it refreshing to look at these scenes not through a photographic lens. And here are some of the postcards they published. There is here, this is Christoph Niemann from Berlin. Ivana kind of jumped me in the presentation before I was able to type the real names of the artists. Olimpia Zaganoli is an illustrator from Italy, and I decided to share with you not her illustrations, and she does have very interesting illustration, also published in New Yorker on a lockdown. But I found her Instagram stories interesting as well. So friends from around the world were curious what was the situation like in Italy. And she decided, and I'm quoting here, she decided to write a few lines while doing laundry. And she says, nothing is happening inside, but outside there is always something going on. All these little things that we usually miss. So I kind of invite you to go and look at her Instagram profile. And to close this cycle of creative outcomes from crisis times, here is the project done by a studio from Amsterdam, Kessels Kramer. The studio collaborated with a screenwriter, Eftimis Philippou, and 62 artists from all over the world. And their project describes windows as objects with emotions that support people. And I want to share with you a video that they made sending out this message about windows. And you will give me just a second.
Dear humans, many of you think we're not able to talk. But humans, that is so very wrong. We can talk. We can also open up. Each time we're touched by your soft hands, left motionless, with your fingerprints all over us. Oh, your fingerprints. And we sure can feel both sadness and joy, but especially sadness. A single letter separates us from widows, after all. Anyway, we always have been next to you, and we always will be, helping you see various things. See? Sincerely yours, The Windows.
Okay. I hope I'm back on. So it is evident that computers have changed the way we think about graphic art. But what we are seeing today is not just computer-based art. There are various platforms and mediums, various mutations of the computer. They're mobile, they're connected, they're instant, and a lockdown rewired them so as to adapt to the new situations. And I somehow feel that this is going to be that legacy coronavirus art is going to leave behind. And I found this fact fascinating, that we are actually living a future historical period which will be observed by future generations, just like we have observed Cuban and Polish poster. Okay. And right now I am trying to go back to my presentation so that we can look at some final remarks. So we have observed how constraints yield creation and provide unique perspective. Artists obviously see crisis as an opportunity to challenge conventions and stimulate engagement. Art can't force a change and move mountains, but it can serve as an antidote to times of chaos. It can provide a new language in which to think and communicate. It can give us a clearer perspective. And this is something that Olivia Lang writes for Guardian. Art is the place when that can happen, where ideas and people are made welcome. It's a zone of enchantment as well as resistance, and it is open even now. And with this thought, I leave you. Art is the limit. Thank you very much for your attention.